Hello and welcome to the January 24th edition of kubeadm Office Hours. I believe today we are going to start by doing some triage of our backlog. Is that right, Tim?
Yep. So I have a shared screen here. And here is the original outline plan for proposed for the 110 timeframe. And I want to go back and refer to it periodically. One thing I want to do before we dig in too far is kind of agree on some type of labeling semantics, so that way as we've done labeling on it and it's approved for a milestone, we're consistent. This is the Kubernetes repo, and they have a separate, oh my gosh, they have so many labels, it's bananas. There is a separate triaged label, which is somewhere, maybe in the 7. Yes, it's a light purple. So I was hoping that we could leverage that label for this repository, if folks aren't opposed to it.
Do we have that label already? Is it?
We do
is that
not.
one that gets synced over or not?
It is not. I don't know why there is not some consistency in some of the labels, but that was not one of them, I don't think. I was trying to look for it earlier. Light purple. Funsies. All right. Let's go back to the 110 milestone. I figured we'd start with 110 milestone, so at least we have a subsection that we all agree to that we're trying to execute on for this cycle. And then I can always triage some of the other backlog items and loop people in over time. But I figured if we get this piece done right, then at least we have some resemblance of reality, and then burn through the rest of the backlog over time. Does that seem like a reasonable approach? All right.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So this is one that I know we will probably address, and I will probably help drive through. This is add the uninterruptible priority and preemption for control plane components. We had a previous annotation that was originally applied to the control plane components, but we never actually deployed the quote unquote rescheduler that prevented things from interrupting. But the kubelet has code, so we'll have to do 2 parts here. We'll have to update the priority of the pods for the master control plane components, and we will have to change a flag on the kubelet that enables this by default. And it should be moved to beta this cycle. And the purpose for that is, like, when we deploy control plane components, they should never be preempted.
Is that true even though the control plane components are in static pods? I thought there was some special treatment for static pods that was sort of already giving us this behavior on a non-self-hosted cluster.
There is, but it doesn't. There are pieces of the control plane like the proxy, which we do deploy via daemon sets still. And those pieces absolutely need to have this annotation.
Right, and that implies that like the kubelet flag needs to be set on all kubelets, not just the master kubelets. Yeah, and the annotation needs to go on the kube proxy and presumably the kubeDNS pods too.
That is true. So notes, we will need to apply the kubelet flags to all nodes to support for the proxy. I figured this one was easy because I already know details about it. All right, so that one's done. Triage, yay. Only 31 left to go. Remotely call kubeadm upgrade plan. I'm not intimately familiar with this one. Tell users they have the potential options from kubeadm upgrade plan command and a web page. Currently from the master machine and local dir checks. This means the API server backing the web page needs to SSH in the master. Do we even support this? Like an API driven operation? I really don't think this is doable in the 110 timeframe unless we have people sign up for it.
Yeah, and the last comment Lucas put on there was that we wanted more information about the feature request. So I think we could ping the issue and say we're still waiting for more information and mark it as triaged.
Yeah, I'm going to clear the milestone too.
It sounds like an amazing feature, but we don't have anything API driven in Kubernetes.
Well, we have an API, but it's not even formalized, right?
Yeah, it's not one that is accessible remotely, is it?
No, not yet.
Yeah, I think this feature request sounds like effectively run kubeadm remotely from where your control plane is to see if I should actually log in and actually run upgrade. So it's basically, can I do some of the pre-flight checks to see if I should upgrade, not running that on inside the master. And
yeah,
at this point is designed to only be run on the machine that it's actually actuating on.
Could we ask them if like running it as a pod would...
Hey, wait. If you got comments, because I'm not gonna, it's hard for me to do all the things. If someone can, the issue number is 495. If you have comments, add them there. All right, so we kicked that one out of the milestone. Totally legit, makes sense. I don't think that would land in a reasonable time frame. Create feature kubeadm end-to-end tests. Under test e2e kubeadm in the core Kubernetes repo, the end-to-end test should be instance of that. I'm missing some context here. 1 second. Now, is he talking about separate under test kubeadm, e2e kubeadm in the core Kubernetes repo? So Kubernetes test. Does anyone know what he's talking about here?
So the test framework supports tags, and I think this is about adding a tag for kubeadm tests.
Yeah, that makes sense. But the location of existing tests is where?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think we can leave this for the time being. I think maybe we should revisit it. What do folks think here? Adding the tag is a pretty trivial change.
But I think that Lucas is asking to create those tests.
Or probably aggregating existing tests under a kubeadm directory.
Yeah, I think we should make kubeadmin specific tests, right? So right now we use kubeadmin and we run like the conformance tests against that cluster, but we're not actually testing the kubeadmin features themselves that are not tested by conformance, right? So things that are mentioned here, like the conformance tests are never going to check that we're like labeling or tainting the master node differently than the the worker nodes. And so this is like, we should make automated tests that verify that that behavior is not changing over time.
But it's not actually exercising it's exercising behavioral aspects of a kubeadm deployment, but it has to be a kubeadm deployment though. So we'd have to like verify. We'd have to verify by checking the config map is the most likely suspect. If the config map exists, we know it's a kubeadm deployment. That's the config map that kubeadm now defaultly uploads. And then from there, you can probably do behavioral level checks to make sure that these are sane.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you could write end-to-end tests that checked each of these things, and you mark them with feature colon kubeadmin, and you only run them on an end-to-end suite that you know was created a priori with kubeadmin, right? I mean, you could also make it dynamically check and try to intuit whether this cluster should support these things, but you could just set it up so that you were only running these tests on clusters that you knew were using kubeadmin and you knew should support these things.
The question is like, I don't like the location of test ETV kubeadmin as the place of this living, because if we fork the repo, this is very specific to this environment, right? And you could absolutely, we do this on our side. We extend the end-to-end test framework through binary mashing to be able to create separate end-to-end tests. I don't necessarily think the regular test framework makes a lot of sense, because there's a lot of jiggery pokery on the suppositions of how everything is stood up, and I don't even think it would ever even be exercised. So having the availability to crib these tests into something is useful, but I don't think they should live in the underneath the main end-to-end tests, if that makes sense. Or do people agree or disagree? Because as we fork the repo, we'd have to rip them out.
So I totally agree. And actually, one of the folks working on the cluster API code is asking the same question, like, how do I write integration tests for the cluster API? Where should those live? And I told him yesterday, outside of the main repo. So we're going to have that same problem there. And we can maybe let him try to figure out how to make that work and then copy the pattern for kubeadmin.
We're actually working on this. Like, we're actively taking tests out of the main, or taking the infrastructure out of the main repository to make it reusable across multiple repositories.
Oh, excellent. If you have pointers to who's working on that, so I can link them up with our engineer who's in Warsaw, that would be awesome.
That'd be me.
Okay. I will point him at
But the effort right now is starting. Some of the people that are starting this are coming from the SIG CLI group. I am basically helping to guide them land in a happy path. So there's a separate testing infrastructure repository that people are creating.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I think if we can just hook him up with people that are also working on the similar problems, that will should make things go faster.
Yep, that makes sense. Do we have any takers to any of this? Because if we don't have takers, I'm going to punt this out of the this release cycle.
I think we are punting it at this point.
Okay.
Is there not a next milestone that we can put stuff on so we catch it next time? Everything just gets kicked out of any milestone?
We do not. Do you want to set one up?
There's a 1.11. If you think this is something we might do next time and we want to come back and triage in 3 months.
I would rather do, hold on one second here. Get another tab. You never have enough tabs. That's the best way to deal with things, right? Milestones. Next milestone? Or should we just call it like, how do we want to handle this? Do we want to call it review, eval? I hate the next milestone naming.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to be consistent with the main repo, it's called next-candidate.
Just because they do it there doesn't mean it's a good idea. Does anyone have a convention that they prefer? In absence of better conventions, I'll default.
Yeah.
I mean, the other option is we've got a v1.11 milestone. We can punt it to there, and that is, like, I don't know why we have a 1.11 and a next candidate, right? Those seem redundant to me.
Well, the problem is, like, if we do that, that means we have to constantly reevaluate, which isn't necessarily a bad idea.
But if we don't reevaluate next candidate, then it's just as bad as removing the milestone.
That is true. I'm okay with punting to 111. All right. And I will not put the triage label on it because we'll have to take a look at it for the next cycle. All right. make kubeadm API self-explanatory, adding comments to all fields. This seems like a reasonable thing that somebody could do, but I thought the API was going to change. 1 second. Does anyone want to sign up for this one? This should be pretty simple.
Yeah, it's going through and adding explanatory comments, right? That you should at least mark it as help wanted if nobody signs up for it.
There we go. There we go. I think what we could do is we could use help wanted as a filter for the end of the release, and we can punt all the things in that milestone that never got triaged because there's no assignee. That seems reasonable. All right. Use component config for kube scheduler. They're moving stuff around, and I don't. We've got most of the things in place, but I don't know if it's going to all land in time to make it clean and tidy. I think it might be a little premature. I would almost want to let this settle for 1 cycle. Because right now they're shuffling both the controller manager and the scheduler to do that API munging for the component config stuff into its own location. And that was very similar to how the kubelet worked. So I don't expect this to be clean this cycle, and I think relying on it might not be the best idea. Does anyone have thoughts here?
That sounds right. Let's punt.
I'll say help wanted, and I will put it on 111. But it is highly useful. This gets you much closer to the state of easier upgrades in the future. Support certificate rotation. Ooh, this one's been on forever. We don't.
So, okay, and so there's obviously the question of self-hosting there, right?
Yeah, so even just with the normal use case, Peter Zhao commented on my etcd TLS PR to add like rotation on upgrade if the certs are old enough. And apparently this is a feature that we've implemented for the API server certs. I'm sure that issue is linked somewhere in this thread.
Most likely.
Yeah, and then I don't know if we have like a phase command that we can run to rotate, but this seems like pretty simple logic. We would want to parameterize it well enough so that people can get the desired behavior. Also, something that I'm just personally uneducated about is I don't know how to where the options are, where the knobs are for like CA expiry and cert expiry. So if somebody knows about that, maybe you could kind of fill us in.
Are you willing to spend cycles on this because it's related to your PR, and maybe have someone else? I can maybe poke Moyer to help you take a look at it too.
Yeah, I was willing to look into this after I cleaned up the etcd TLS one. So yeah.
What's your GitHub nick? It's different, right?
Stealthy Box. Yeah.
That's yeah. Are you on this repo?
Yeah, I'm on. I'm not sure if I'm marked as like a collaborator, but yeah, it's Stealthy Box.
So I am going to unassign. I don't want Lucas to be assigned anything because he's going to be busy.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to say.
Lee, there are a couple people at Google that I was recently talking to about certificate rotation. If you ping Mike Denise on Slack and ask him to connect you with the other folks, because I don't know what their Slack or GitHub IDs are, I'm not sure if they're going to do anything actively on it right now, but they can at least sort of talk to you about some of the thoughts that they have going forward. But they've definitely been thinking about this.
Okay. Yeah, Tim, I think Rob mentioned Mike Denise. I don't know if you want to put him in that comment.
I think he's already CC'd farther up, so he'll probably get pinged on it. But you
Okay.
can ping him directly on Slack because a lot of people heavily filter GitHub notifications.
Cool. When I work on this, I will ping Mike and potentially you. Yeah, I mean, is this something that we would expect that in the normal static pod use case, we would rotate the certs individually per node? That seems like the desired experience to me. Like I would go onto the master one, and then I would like kubeadm phase certs rotate, you know, and then go onto the worker, rotate the certs, go onto worker 2.
Ideally, it would be like as part of the upgrade would be like a introspective daemon set, you know,
with a host path now.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be the simplest thing, because then you could just boom hit the cluster, right?
Yeah, on any master node, right? No.
You could hit any node, so
Any node.
provided you had the taints and toleration set up properly.
We want to make sure that that code path is pretty non-destructive. I know Peter mentioned that they use the backup directory, and we would only ever want to rotate a cert forward. Cool. I'll look at it.
Okay, cool. Yay, triaged. This one was help wanted, and I'll leave it in the cycle, and the help wanted ones, like I mentioned earlier, would be punted out if they're not worked on. I don't know how this got this machine readable output for kubeadm upgrade.
Oh, well.
I see what he's asking for. I don't. I would propose that you would want an output file that's more processable than like trying to do structured logging of any kind. Like he mentions here, JSON or YAML file. I know that like other systems emit like a junit.xml file, but that's, you know, Java-y things. It seems like a feature request, but I don't think anyone's working on it. I don't think it's really high priority either.
So, I mean, I just wonder what they're trying to achieve. I guess they're
building automation, it looks like.
This is the same guy that had the other feature request we triaged earlier. I would do the same thing to this one. Because there's no comment after Lucas asking, tell me more.
Okay. I'm going to say help wanted, and
maybe they could come up with an example of the output that they'd like to see instead of what we currently produce.
I'm happy to, if you want to put a comment there on 494.
Yeah, 494.
Yep.
Are all of these operations available to be called via the kubeadm API? Like if I vendor kubeadm into my application?
Everything that's been done I believe the structure has been broken down so that it's completely importable. That was always the plan. So you could import any subsection of kubeadm, and the command line has been factored to use reusable libraries, which has been broken down into phases.
Yeah, because I know that Chris Love and I talked about like what it's going to look like, you know, when kubeadm is mature enough to be vendored into something like Cox.
Yes, there's other utilities, you know, the cluster API and Kubecorn, which we're also leveraging pieces of this too. So over time, that is the intent. So they could just call it directly versus having some automation, which is dependent upon output files, right? But that presupposes that everyone uses Go, right?
Well, I think in kubecorn we actually just download the binary on the box and invoke it with a shell script.
Yeah, and I remember hearing from Chris that it would be nicer if kubecorn could call kubeadm directly as a library.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, we factor it into a set of composable libraries. And we're actually doing this downstream for some stuff that we're working on, not kubeadm specific, but like the Sonobuoy project is factored that way. So this command line has tiers, which then use a library. Those libraries are broken down into subdependencies. So that way, if people want to build automation, they can just leverage the interface library instead of having to like shell.
Yeah, the only reason I bring it up is, you know, the requester already mentioned that they wrote a Go binary in order to invoke kubeadm, and it makes me wonder if there is a portion of the API surface that they can call and actually get the structure they're looking for.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it API surface though. Like there's like connotations applied with formalized APIs versus like you have a library you can just link into. You can directly import the library.
Yeah, well, I guess hopefully there's something in there that would not necessitate their rely on log output in order for them to actually do this, to receive this functionality from the code.
You can always comment on 494 too.
Yeah.
kubeadm token create cannot read from config file.
Yeah, I saw that. Oh, so they want to make it more secure. Isn't there like always a bash hack you could resort to where you kind of pass a thing instead of actual argument, like
Well, Fabrizio's on the call. It's assigned to him. Fabrizio, are you going to work on this one?
I will try to do it this into this cycle. We already implemented in the phases there is an equivalent of the same operation under the phasing, and there is already implemented the support for the kubeconfig file. I will try to do in this cycle.
Okay. Kubernetes packages depend upon cloud provider packages. Is that still the case? I don't even know how things have been factored nowadays and what the state of the factoring is. Somehow all of the in-tree cloud provider packages are built into kubeadm. Yeah. I think this is heavily reliant on them factoring their libraries properly. I don't necessarily think that we should take lead on this one. That's my take. Do other people have opinions here?
That sounds reasonable. Unless somebody's really excited about fixing this right now.
No, if you love dependency graphs for libraries, I'm going to put a help wanted label on it. And I'll put a comment. This is heavily depend on the status of other libraries being factored properly. Right. Enhance kubeadm phase to graduate to top level command Fabricius has got you by two again. 1 second.
I will most probably work on this the next cycle, in my opinion. And I was sketching up a prototype in order to get rid of a lot of duplication of code that now we have for the CLI of the phases of the CLI of the main report. And I'm working on this, but it requires some time.
Okay. Find a solution, Rhapsody. I don't think this is going to be done this cycle. I think this will be an ongoing, continuous effort. Does anyone have thoughts here?
That sounds right. I mean, some of the, like secure by default TLS encryption, like Lee's working on some sub pieces of this, but this is like a sort of an umbrella issue here, right?
It is, yep. This is the similar type one regarding HA. We might get pieces in place in the in some of Fabrizio's work, but they'll be feature gated and probably turned off by default. This seems very similar. Make it possible to set custom config file in end-to-end CI tests. Oh, this is different than what I thought. I don't know if we should own this. Custom args to reduce kubelet cert expiration time in order to have those certs rotated during intent. This seems almost like you'd want to, this requires jiggery on the kubelet side.
These are, it looks like these might be different args than like dynamic kubelet config is trying to solve.
I don't think this is going to get solved in 110, unless anyone's going to volunteer to work on this stuff. I get the gist of what he's asking for, but I don't think we have resources to, unless somebody volunteers for it.
So this is about testing cert rotation, essentially, right?
It is, but the jiggery to make this all work is within CI is pretty rough goings, because there's a ordered stand up and it's not very dynamic. So I'm gonna put a help wanted flag on it and bump. Any objections? Nope.
Do you want to mention what you just said on the issue?
Sure. I will say this requires understanding of how the test infra setup is run and how to dynamic change configs on the fly, which may require restarting components. So it isn't easy. Kabang. Make deploying stuff as a control plane by default. I don't know if we're going to get default. but we will get further. I know, Ilya, you said you were going to take a look at the self-hosted issue. Should I assign this one to you?
Okay, yes, sounds good. Yeah, I've not started on that yet. I'm trying to clear away other things.
Again, I'm gonna remove Lucas from assignment wherever possible because he's gonna be busy. Provide consistent UX for install docs. We always have like a docs issue every cycle. Does anyone want us to be the guinea pig for running through all of the documentation?
I've discussed that with Lucas, so I was going to do that. That's on my list.
Okay. I'll leave Jamie there too.
Tim, I'll also see if we have any resources that can help with that.
Stupid. Code cleanup for token create, pub key hash, and print join command. This has got you on it, Fabrizio. See how many more we got. We're actually doing a pretty good job of burning this down.
So I was trying to get my head around what goes in kubeadmin repo and what happens to the main repo.
Yes.
In terms of which issues to start with. It seems like a lot of issues in kubeadmin repo are created by contributors. So some of them more knowledgeable users, but the kind of really general bugs filed in the main repo. Is that the case?
So I sent you that link, and that requires its own TLC. I did a PR slog for all the PRs that against kubeadm, and I made sure I went through Lucas's backlog too. But there needs to be a separate cleaning of the main repo, and that there's a lot of cruft in there, right? So what happens is on that query, you will see old issues that are unrelated, and you'll see a lot of bug reports filed, but there won't necessarily be. Some of them are just spurious, right? So Lucas did a lot of things, probably too many things. And one of those things was to clean up and move things out of the mainline repo into kubeadm repo. So users do typically file bugs in the mainline repo, but the curated ones have been pushed over here. So a lot of curation from the past has been pushed into this repo. So this repo does have a lot of history of the major features that have been requested over time. But I did send out that link to all the people who volunteered and wanted to go through that list. There's about 100 separate issues to plow through on the mainline repo. Not all of them are related to kubeadm. Sometimes they just reference it in the title, even though it's totally unrelated. You just have to see what's what. And I'd highly recommend applying the SIG Cluster Lifecycle label to those issues. That makes it way easier to triage. So if you go through that list and you've applied the SIG Cluster Lifecycle labels, the ones that are appropriate, that alone will give us better visibility into what needs to be addressed or pushed out.
Yeah, so open issues, search kubeadm, and apply SIG Cluster Lifecycle. That's what you're saying, right?
No, you have to suss through them because there's a lot of them that indirectly reference it, but they're not, they don't actually pertain to kubeadm, right?
Yeah, after the label is applied, they still may not be related. Yeah.
Yeah, that might be. You might be able to blanket, and then it might be faster to blanket and then remove than it is to, piece walk through and make them see which ones apply and which ones don't.
Well, one thing I've been doing is that now that the bot comes in, the bot obviously has its own way of figuring out which issues are too old, but some of the issues are some of the issues would have been closed by now if we had the bot around a while ago.
Yes.
So I was trying to apply the rule. Well, if this is like a year away from bot's message about from the time bot sets the stale flag, I just close it, right?
Yep.
Because if we had a bot a year ago, it would have been closed by now.
Yep. Any other questions about the locations of bugs and issues and whatnot around the topic? All right, Fabrizio, I know you were trying to talk earlier. This one's related to you, and you wanted to basically it sounds like you wanted to factor the code.
Yes, this was a reminder that I thought when implementing the 1.1 PR in the last cycle. It is in my backlog. I have to finish it.
Do you think you'll get to it in the 1.10 cycle, or it will be 1.11?
Yes.
Yes, 1.10 or yes, 1.11?
1.10, sorry.
All right, that's okay. All right. Graduate kubelet config to beta. I don't know.
Is this related to dynamic kubelet config?
It sounds like it. I think he wants to graduate this phases command to beta.
If I'm not wrong, there is already a PR for this.
I don't see it referencing this. Add phases command dynamically. There you go. So he's already working on that. We'll say it's triaged. Use localhost for API server health checks. I don't.
Okay.
This doesn't seem like it's hard. If anyone wants to work on this one, I can just label this as help wanted, unless somebody raises their hand.
Help wanted sounds good.
So at the moment it goes through the outside world or something, or what happens? Oh, but that means you'd have to make it listen. Okay. Does it still listen on localhost for health?
I'd have to tinker.
But,
I think it's automatically set.
I think that there is another PR that tells to use the downward API for the health checks.
Yes, that was done already. I believe that one is already done. I don't, so I'll send this to me to triage. All right. Ooh, did I say triaged? I'll leave the help wanted flag too, just in case.
Just so there's one about downward API. Also.
I missed your question.
I just saw there's an issue with downward API something.
The downward API, the way we've specified advertise address for the master leverages the downward API to get the host IP address. And it might fix this problem. I'd have to take a look and verify.
Okay, yeah, I was actually referring to another issue that I saw in the list, which had downward API there, just up.
The one right above the triage list. You see where we're at here. Oh, we're doing pretty well. This is pretty good.
Speaking of which, Fabrizio was hoping to talk about a PR before we end today, and we're also running a little bit short on time.
That seems reasonable. For the rest of this list, I don't know if people wanted to. I do think we need to go through the rest of the backlog at some other time. There's just a tremendous amount of history here, and without somebody who has all that history in their brain when we're driving through some of this stuff, it's difficult for people. My goal in this cycle was to clean things up and get it into a state where we can have more people come online and it's easy for them to suss out what's going on. So any help I get there is highly beneficial, and I might poke you, Ilya, possibly if there's another time where we could go through some of this list together. Right, I'll stop it there.
Speaking of which, Tim, are you on the West Coast time or you're closer to us?
I'm Central, so.
Okay, so perhaps we could have a meeting sometime earlier in the day.
Yes, that would work fine with me. I just talked with some UK folks this morning at 8 or 9 works fine for me, Central time, which is like 4 o'clock your time or something.
Okay.
Fabrizio, did you wanna, is he still on?
That's a good question. I don't see him on the list anymore. I did take a look at the PR briefly. I wasn't sure what he wanted to discuss with the PR exactly. Maybe we should ping him in Slack and see if there's something we can do offline since he's no longer here.
We can always, do you want me to continue on, or should we go to the other topic?
Well, if Fabrizio's not here, I think he's back. So Fabrizio, we were just saying we were going to switch tacks and discuss the pull request that you stuck in chat a while back, which is 58698. And I was curious what feedback you were hoping for from this group on the PR.
That's the plumbing for the CIDR address routing. I was going to leave it to the Intel guy who I think wrote the original change, and he had comments on it. I wasn't going to chime in because I haven't been deeply involved in the IPv4 v6 GU, as I like to call it. And I know they have been. So any other networking folks who really want to get into this one?
Yeah, it looked like Ilya left a couple of comments on the pull request yesterday.
Yeah, but I mean, I understand networking, but I don't understand proxy stuff enough. I was a little bit confused at the beginning, to be honest. It's, yeah, I've commented there, so.
Fabrizio, is there anything else you wanted to discuss about that pull request? Okay, I need to drop off, so I'm going to stop the recording to let Zoom churn through processing it before the next meeting starts in 7 minutes. But I won't end the meeting if you guys wanted to keep going through the backlog for a couple more minutes.
It's up to other folks. I might set up a time for Ilya and I to kind of churn through. Does that make sense? And if other folks are interested, just send me a ping on Slack and I'll include you too.
I'll ping you in.
Okay.
So propose a time and we'll take it from there.
Fridays are usually meeting free for the most part, so perhaps a Friday morning.
That could work, yeah.
All right, well, thank you everyone for coming. Hopefully by next week, we'll have the rest of the issues triaged and be able to get back to talking about the rest of the things on the agenda.